Okay, so we're going to continue with working with the IEEE Center for Secure Design design flaws, or the principles that we need to consider as we're designing our entire system so that it is secure in its design. The two principles that we're going to talk about in this module are use cryptography correctly and identify sensitive data, and they are very related principles. The first thing that we'll talk about is, what is cryptography in the first place? And so if you think about these two, a little boy and this girl that want to share some information, and they want to share this message, "Hello, Alice," but they want to do it in secret. And so what the boy does is he comes up with a key that's here and transfers this message of "Hello, Alice" into something called ciphertext. So it's transferred from "Hello, Alice" to this ciphertext, and then this message that's generated here is not recognizable by anyone but Alice. And then using some transmission, it comes over to Alice. It's still at ciphertext. This message is still secret. Alex also has a key here, and she uses her key to transfer the message back into something that she can actually read, which is "Hello, Alice." And so that's how cryptography works. It really works. You need these special keys that both the little boy and the little girl have, cipher keys that would transfer the ciphertext back into plain text. So the important principle is to use cryptography correctly. Why do we use cryptography in the first place? We want to protect the confidentiality of data. Maybe the little boy doesn't want to know anyone to know about the message. Protect data from unauthorized modification, and authenticate the source of data. As far as protecting, cryptography is discussed a lot, but a lot of very basic services don't use cryptography. You hear of breaches and you think that the data would have been encrypted so that you couldn't see the information, but actually you still could. Authenticating the source of data is done through digital signatures, which are encrypted. So as far as some pitfalls that you need to watch for with cryptography, first is rolling your own cryptographic algorithms. So rolling your own algorithms that would change the "Hello, Alice" message into the ciphertext. There are many algorithms out that are available. There are people who spend their whole life on these algorithms. They can do a way better job than any of us can do with developing the algorithms that would keep the data safe. So use an established algorithm. Misuse of libraries and algorithms. So you need to make sure that you understand how to use them before you use them. Poor key management. So key management, which is the little keys that are used to change the data into ciphertext and back. You need to make sure that the keys are long enough so that people couldn't do a brute force trying to guess what the key is. You need to make sure it's long enough. You need to distribute the keys through secure channels so that people can't pick up the keys off the network. You need to store the keys in a secure vault so that the keys can't be stolen. And for sure, you never want to store your keys in plain text. You need to have them encrypted as well. So poor key management is a pitfall. Randomness that is not random. Often the keys have some element of randomness in them. But if there's a way to crack your randomness algorithm, then that's another way that an attacker could get your key. With all of this, I would suggest if you have sensitive data, work with an expert, work with a cryptography expert in order to get it all done correctly. And along those lines, a principle of security in general is don't reinvent the wheel. So there are cryptographic algorithms, use them, don't invent your own. Other areas that this can come in, like there are established login modules, use an established login module, use input filtering modules, things that other people have spent a lot of time on. Better to use those security mechanisms than to invent your own. The second principle of the IEEE Center for Secure Design is to identify your sensitive data. So you can look at your overall system and look at the data that you're going to store and determine different sensitivity levels. So data comes from users, potentially identifiable information. Data comes from lots of places, even sensors these days. And take a look at all of the data that you have and rate it and decide how you're going to handle it. Establish policies. So establish a policy that would say all potentially identifiable information is encrypted, those kinds of things, the policies that you need to set in place and adhere to throughout. So, handling sensitive data, sometimes the way you handle your sensitive data is handed to you in the form of a regulation, like, say, HIPAA. And then you need to abide by HIPAA if you have healthcare data, and therefore, your policies are set for you. Your company may have a policy. You may have contractual obligations about the way you store your data, so they may be handed to you, but in general, you need to make sure that you handle sensitive data correctly. Data sensitivity can be context dependent. It may depend upon the situation that's going on, where you are, there can be break the glass scenarios. So a break the glass scenario, I'll use a healthcare example, says, in the case of an emergency, just let all of the safeguards down and let lots of people have information. Like in the case of a hurricane. Doctors from other hospitals that came in to help, you need to make sure that you have a policy set in place that in that kind of an emergency that you're going to take all the safeguards down and let more people look at the data. So within your system, prepare for that type of an emergency. So some things to consider when you're handling sensitive data: access control mechanisms. We went through that in the last module. Use cryptography to protect your confidentiality of the data. Like I said, there are breaches all the time, involve healthcare information and other information, and then you see that the data wasn't even encrypted. Like, when I read reports like that, I think, what are they thinking? How could you have healthcare data and not encrypt it? But there's lots of systems out there that don't use cryptography. Make sure yours is not one of those. Redundancy. So if you have sensitive data, you may want to have it in more than one place in case there's some corruption of one data set. You want to have a backup. Consider data at rest. So when the data is sitting in the database, is it encrypted, whatnot? And then data in transit, when you're transferring data from one system to another, even from the server to a client, that data can be captured by an attacker. So you want to make sure that you transfer it securely. And you also consider trust and trust enclaves. So in the case of your data, who do you trust with the data? And an enclave would be a grouping. So who is within your trust boundary? You need to be thinking about that when you design your data mechanisms. Here's just a little comic to end this module about cryptography. So a crypto nerd's imagination says his laptop's encrypted, let's build $1 million cluster to crack it. So thinking that that's what it's going to take to get the data off of his laptop because it's cracked, and they're talking about some RSA algorithm for how many bits are in the key. But really what would happen is his laptop's encrypted, let's drug him and hit him with the $5 wrench until he tells us the password. That's the reality of what could happen. And then once they have the password, then the hard drive would be unencrypted.